Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from tLAoK, and today we are continuing our faction breakdown, going through all of the various army lists for the factions in the game Conquest now that it's in its second edition. If you want to learn more about the changes from the previous editions, I do have another video. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. Today we're going to be focusing exclusively on the Wadroon, sort of the orc equivalent within the Conquest setting. Now, if you're interested in this faction whatsoever and you want to support the channel, I do have an affiliate link to Bellum down below. It'll save you 10% on all your purchases, no matter what you get, and a portion of that goes to supporting me, the channel. Bellum is fantastic to work with. I thank you, my wife, our cats, all of it. Thank you so much to everyone who's used those links. So I'm doing this series right at the early outset of 2.0, basically getting everyone caught up just by breaking down the various regiments, units, I'm going to use those interchangeably, within this particular faction, go over its army rules, basically break it all down. Now, all of this information is for free online. I just wanted to read through some of the major rules and give you some context to understanding it in case it interests you, or someone at your local group has a Wadroon army. We're just going to focus on the regiments that are released as of the recording of this video, just to kind of trim down the fat a little bit on these videos, but I'm so excited because Wadroon is actually the faction that I am jumping in with. It was supposed to be Nords, and then a local friend made me a screaming offer on some Wadroon, and so I took that. They're already built, and that's going to be a part of our painting league in mid-February. I'll talk about that more later. So I'm stoked. These are going to be my guys for at least the first part of 2023. Let's dive in to the Wadroon. Got our screen share here for the main rule book, and we're going to be going basically between this and the army builder reference stuff, just because sometimes these things collate information a little bit better than the actual PDF. But let's start moving through. We'll get past all this intro stuff. And we're going to move right into the Wadroon army special rules. So the first one we have here is Hymns of the Brave. When a character stand in this army destroys an enemy character stand as a result of a dual action, the regiment this character stand is currently attached to gains the Fanatic special rule until the end of the round. We'll talk about Fanatic. It is a really cool rule to be able to get. The only reason why you're not going to see this a ton is because it means that the character had to have been in a duel before the regiment activated to be able to get full use out of it, which doesn't always happen. It's a very, I don't know, it kind of depends on what you're running against. You also need to have a regiment be broken so that they can't refuse the duel, stuff like that. It's going to be situational, but it can be very cool. But the main rule that you're going to hear about for these guys is the war chant. And here's basically how I want to break this down. If you are coming from a other property, like say Fantasy Battles, or which is another rank flank game, or Age of Sigmar, or something like that with other orcs in the settings, there's usually this idea of a battle cry. In Games Workshop terms, it's called the Wah, and it's basically a war cry that goes up and all the orcs get really, really excited. And in most cases, rules-wise, what that means is a one-turn game effect that it makes them incredibly dangerous, kind of a deal. Well, Bellum has kind of a different take on that. Rather than being a singular battle cry, the Wadroon have a chant that permeates the battle throughout the entire game. When a regiment activates, one thing I should note is that as you're building your list, every warband, meaning for every hero, you have to choose a cult for them. There's the cult of famine, conquest, there's the cult of war, and death. You have to choose one to be a part of. When you activate a regiment from that particular warband, you put what's called chant marker. That is to say, this actual unit begins chanting and praising the particular deity that they want to channel, and then you put a chant marker into the sequence. Now, at any point, if you have 3 markers in the sequence, when you activate a regiment, you take all those away, and depending on a chart that we'll get here in a second, you get a particular buff. But the reason I wanted to point this out early is that you determine what buff you get by the order in which you activate regiments, i.e., what chant markers you put into the sequence. There can only ever be 3. There are ways to manipulate the system. You can replace them with some dummies. You can chant stuff when there's only 2. There's a lot of other details that we're going to get into, but the core idea is every time a regiment activates, they chant. You put a chant marker relating to whatever cult they're dedicated to, and on the 3rd one, no matter what, you don't have a choice. When that regiment activates, they chant and they do this whole big war cry. You check to see how many chant markers they have, pick a bonus based on what's available to you, and you're good to go. The regiment activates and gets that bonus. And then the whole sequence repeats. So depending on how many regiments you have in your list, you can actually get several uses out of this per turn, as opposed to a once per game big wah. Now you do have quite a bit of choices when it comes to that. I want you guys to read this. If you're interested in playing the Wadroon yourself, you have to go through and actually read this to get the minutia of it, because there are, like I said, ways to manipulate it. But as a regiment activates, you throw a chant marker in the sequence. If there's one there, meaning they're the first ones to activate, generally speaking, nothing's going to happen. When you activate your second, well, then you start getting the choice to chant early. If you were to do so, you could unleash your battle cry, and you'll look down at your markers and you'll say, okay, I have, now it says here, if there's one or more chant marker in the sequence, you can choose to chant the battle cry. So by your second, regiment that activates, you will have 2 chant markers locked and loaded. You can then, for that second unit, chant the battle cry, and they'll get this first tier. Essentially, what you're trying to do when you chant is you look at the particular number of each cult's markers that you have. So if a death unit activates, we throw 1 death chant marker in there. And if I had 3 of them activate at the same time, when I go to chant the battle cry, I would count up, how many death markers do I have? I have 3. So I would go to this second tier 2, which uses 3 markers. And these are cumulative. So I would get the regiment gains the flawless strike rule, as well as the tier 1, this regiment gains +1 to its clash characteristic. Now, if you want to read these and focus in on any of them, we'll go through them here in a second, but realistically, you have these 3 options: famine, death, and war that your warbands can be a part of, and conquest is available to anybody, okay? And these are great, like ubiquitous, no matter what your list is, moves. The only thing with conquest is if you want to use this one, you have to have the accurate number of markers taken from more than one type of chant. So for example, if I had 2 famine and a death, I could cash all those in. I could either go for tier 1 of famine, because I had 2 markers for that, or I could go tier 2 of conquest, because I have 3 markers total coming from different battle cries or whatever. There's a great example here that walks through that, including what happens if you accidentally, there's some mechanics that give you an extra marker. So what happens in the case of you having a 4th marker, it basically walks you through that system and then goes through how to chant different battle cries. Now, the reason we're going to take some real time and focus on this chart is because, one, every single regiment in this faction, barring dinosaurs, I believe they have a particular keyword that bars them from using this table, but anything that's actually like a Wadroon has access to this table, which means we have to look at all of these buffs through, look at those regiments through the lens of they could potentially have these things. Now, right off the chart, you'll see there's 3 tiers, and 2 of them are pretty average, the ones we've talked about, but then there's also this tier 3. Tier 3 is interesting because you have to have 3 markers, just like the one before it, but you also have to have the fanatic special rule, which we learned that your regiment gets if your heroes kill an enemy hero in a duel action. Well, many regiments also just have the fanatic keyword, or heroes can give their regiment the fanatic keyword, that kind of thing. So realistically, those are going to be that's your tier for your elite units that you've invested in. And so let's go through these here. So tier 1 of famine, we'll go in terms of the different, battle cries that you can put out. So famine, tier 1, meaning 2 markers. You could do this every other unit if you wanted to. This regiment gains +2 to charge distance, and the shock special rule. Shock is terrific. It essentially gives you double inspire when you charge. So all of these regiments can, at any time, if they want, and you set it up properly, have +2 clash on the charge. And the +2 to charge distance is fantastic because these guys are not slow. They are highly aggressive. For tier 2 of famine, we have the Relentless Blows special rule, and I'll pull them up here on screen just as a reminder. When a stand with this special rule performs a clash or dual action, each hit of 1 causes an additional automatic hit, and those further hits do not explode. So that makes them brutal in melee, exploding 1s. And then tier 3, which is the same, but if you have the Fanatic special rule, you gain Impact 2 and Glorious Charge special rules. And Glorious Charge is a stand with this special rule performs a successful charge. Its impact attacks are resolved at +1 clash. Remember, you just got impact as well. And Terrifying +1. Terrifying is a negative modifier to your opponent's resolve. So the famine one really emphasizes you to focus on charging and that initial decisive strike. Now, what's also cool is that you can mix warbands together. So you could have one famine one that you just focus on generating these markers in the early game because you want this aggressive speed action, and then later on, just kind of focus your mind on other ones as the game progresses. That's what's great about it. The next one here is Death. So tier 1 for Death is this regiment gains +1 to its clash characteristic. Again, clash is fantastic. It's not quite as good as it is as good as shock on the charge, right? Shock on the charge gives you +2 to clash, but this one is a consistent, you can be in combat, you don't have to make a charge move to get +1 clash. And that's just a really great rule in general. Because remember, this is different than Inspire. So you could activate this, Inspire, and clash, and you've functionally done something very similar. The pros and cons is just a matter of what can you do while you're already in combat and what things can you do while you're charging in. So for tier 2 is where things get a little bit more different. So for Death, they will gain at tier 2 the Flawless Strike special rule, which I have here. When a stand with this special rule performs a clash or a dual action, all hit rolls of 1 count the target's defense as 0 for that attack, and other ones that you roll don't do anything special. This is a wonderful one to have if you are anticipating facing some very heavily armored or highly defensive units. If you have a regiment that you basically buff up to just pour as many shots or hits or whatever as you want, like roll as many dice as humanly possible at an enemy, and you have the Flawless Strike special rule, you will tear through them much faster than they anticipated, especially because, again, you're doing it at a +1 clash minimum. So that's already a tempting one when it comes to a largely low armored army, meaning Wadroon are basically clad in leather, and they're running against some hardened plate Dweghome and that kind of stuff. Being able to get around shielding in some way is very meaningful. Now for tier 3, which again, 3 markers, but you have the Fanatic special rule, this regiment gains the Untouchable and Deadly Blades special rules. Untouchable being this regiment rerolls defense rolls of 6, making your guys more survivable, and Deadly Blades, when a stand with this special rule performs a clash or a dual action, any failed defense rolls of 6 rolled by the target regiment cause it to suffer 2 wounds instead of 1. And remember, Deadly Blades is it stacks with their other one, Flawless Strikes, which means if you hit somebody with a Fanatic Death unit, at this point, you're +1 clash just for showing up. If you charged, you're going to be at +2, I believe. Every time you roll a 1, it's double hits. Every time they fail a defense roll with a 6, it's double hits. Not to mention you yourself are re-rolling failed save rolls of 6 with Untouchable. So Death is a very, very good choice, I think. It addresses a lot of the things that are prominent in the game. High armor, basically it complements the Wadroon strength of being able to throw a lot of dice at something. I like it. Now our third battle cry is for War. Tier 1, meaning 2 markers, this regiment immediately loses the broken status. That's just period, end of statement. That's terrific, because in 2nd edition, the broken status is massive. It kind of went from being like a benign thing that was like, I kind of lose a few options here and there, to being life or death. If your regiment is breaking, you can't heal them. Their action pool is severely limited. They don't want to do anything, basically. So being able to just kind of point and click with remove broken status before the regiment activates is quite cool. You don't have to do like a reform action or anything like that. You just nick that in the butt. Now, in addition to that, it adds +1 to its defense characteristics until the end of the round. Now, it's interesting that the more defensive one, I would say, is under the battlecry topic of war, but this is a great utility piece. If you have a regiment that is broken, but you're not ready to lose them, you can activate them here. It only takes 2 markers to do so, and they can relieve that broken status so they don't get shattered, and then also have +1 defense until the end of the round. So you'd activate them early, but it's for the purpose of keeping them around. Now, tier 2, again, 3 markers. This regiment adds +1 to its Resolve characteristic and gains the Cleave 1 special rule. Now, I'll be honest, I love Cleave 1. I think it's just wonderful to have on basic units, and the fact that anyone can take this is great. But to me, where the War battlecry really takes center stage is with their tier 3, which is if you have 3 markers and the Fanatic special rule. This regiment gains the Blessed and Counter Attack special rules. Blessed are, if you are not familiar, essentially before you're about to roll either for a attack or a defense for this unit, you can basically choose one and say, I'm going to re-roll these. Once per round, declared before rolling any dice, stands with this special rule may choose to re-roll all their failed hit rolls during a clash or volley action, or all of its failed defense rolls. All stands in the regiment must re-roll the same roll at the same time. So you can't have a regiment that's like, I'm going to re-roll my shots, and another one that's going to be, I'm going to re-roll my defenses. Nope, you got to pick one per round, but this is an immensely powerful offensive and defensive ability. And counterattack is one I actually didn't ever really have much access to when I was doing my Dweg home, at least that I saw. During an enemy regiment's clash action performed against this regiment, each unmodified defense roll of 1 causes 1 hit to the active enemy regiment. These hit rolls do not benefit from any other special rules, and then it goes into details about a dual action, which I'm not super worried about, but essentially if I roll save rolls of 1, it hurts my opponent. That's an interesting one. I mean, the war one is a very mixed bag. There's some great tactical utility there. It's just not always going to feel like you're getting as much value as you do with some of the other ones. The last one here is Conquest, and Conquest, remember, you can always use it at any given time, but you have to spend more than 1 type of marker. So if you have 1 death and 1 war, you spend those, you have 2 markers for Conquest. So these are things that literally everybody has access to for any reason. So tier 1, requiring only 2 markers for Conquest. This regiment adds +3 to its march characteristic when performing the first march action of its activation. That is awesome. And it does stack with a standard bearer, which gives you +1 to your second move action. Meaning if you come onto the table and activate with this, you do a move. Actually, I don't know if that would work. Let me double check that. But essentially, +3 to your movement is terrific for all these regiments because we're going to be going through them. They don't have terrible movement stats whatsoever, so they can be quite nimble. That's a great, anytime you need to get someone to an objective or something like that, having a 2 marker buff like that for speed in your pocket is always good. The next one, at tier 2, requiring 3 markers, again from different groups, this regiment adds +2 to its evasion characteristic to a maximum of 3. Evasion, if you're new to Conquest, is really important because it's sort of like a ward. It's not an after save. You have to choose between using your defense save or your evasion, but there's nothing to modify an evasion score. So that's a really good defensive one, to be honest with you, because again, you know, it might just add 2, meaning a third of the time your guys don't die, but it's a very consistent third because there's, again, no modifiers, no negative modifiers to it rather. And then the last one here, tier 3, is if you have the fanatic special rule for whatever reason, this regiment may perform a third action. Normal restrictions apply, so you can't shoot twice, that kind of thing, during its activation this round. So you just give them a lot of utility. This could be anything from rallies, reforms, repositions, all these kinds of things. Pivot if you need to get somewhere extra. These are wonderful. And when you consider that the bonuses of each cult tier are cumulative, if you get a third action, you also have +2 evasion and +3 to your first march thing. You know, it stacks. Now, regarding these abilities, it's going to take some time to get used to them, but when you start reading further into the various characters and artifacts and masteries that allow you to manipulate this system, I do believe it'll be pretty clear. It sounds like a lot to read and take in at once, but truthfully, like when I first started list building and playing on TTS with some of this stuff, I just chose my whole faction from the same cult, because that way I would always be able to very consistently tell exactly what markers are going to come and when and what I could use them from. I think maybe I had I had a scion with 1 regiment by himself, and he had a different cult, so that if I wanted to, I could have 2 different groups to always get the Conquest one, but that's it. Like, I kept it very, very minimal, which is wonderful. It can be as much as you want it to be. It could be you take everything from the exact same cult and every other unit, because now you have 2 markers and all you want to focus on is this little top row. You can do that if you want. You could also, again, start stretching into other things, bring the fanatic rule in, all without leaving a singular cult. Or you can go crazy and try to get as many benefits as possible. I don't think it's a good idea to try to get all of them, but my general approach lately has been pick 2 so that you can always have Conquest in your pocket as well, and just lean in from there. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to look at the various supremacy abilities, and we're just going to focus on 3 of them because the chieftain's not out yet, but the other ones are really cool. And these are essentially abilities that are based solely on what warlord you choose. So everything we've talked about thus far are options that are available to everyone no matter what you want to do with your Wadroon. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of who's leading your army and what abilities, or I guess peculiarities or strengths, do they bring to your faction. So we'll kick it off with the Matriarch Queen. The Matriarch walks. The character stand gains the following draw event for the duration of the battle, and it's always considered to be active. Okay, so what's our draw event? Target friendly non-monster regiment within 8 inches of this character stand, or monster stand in the case of the Apex Master. You can put the Matriarch Queen on a giant T-Rex. It gains the Fanatic special rule until the end of the round. So immediately we're seeing once per round, every time you activate the Matriarch Queen, it hands out the ability to use these tier 3 uber buffs. Which again, if you're focusing, they are cumulative, so keep that in mind, but it basically gives the ability to go Super Saiyan for one regiment nearby. And you could even do stuff like, for example, you activate the Matriarch Queen, she adds a chant marker to the sequence and picks, because that's a draw event, you pick it immediately, the unit nearby. Then when that regiment activates, now you've already got 2 loaded in the chamber. That's 2 chant markers and the Fanatic special rule. It would not take much to get that over the edge and you know, have any kind of regiment activate beforehand. And you're cooking with gas with these guys. We're gonna skip past the Chieftain, although I will say I do think his ability is quite honestly the best that there is. Shock Assault, basically your entire army gains shock, which is you get +1 to your clash on top of the actual bonus for Inspire when you charge. So every time a unit charges, +2 clash. I explained that terribly in a very awkward way, but I like the consistency and simplicity of it. The rule that you remember is better than the rule that you forget. It doesn't matter what the rules are. Okay, next one here is the Predator, and there is an option to have a mounted Predator, but they have the same ability. So Thrill of the Kill. All friendly regiments may re-roll their charge rolls this round. So this is one you have to announce during the supremacy phase. In addition, I mean, that's a pretty good one. That essentially is a standard bearer for every single regiment in your faction, even if they can't take them. In addition, all friendly light regiments add +3 to their charge distance. All friendly medium regiments add +1, and all friendly heavy regiments gain the impact +1 special rule. How this essentially pans out, as we'll see, light regiments, you're just giving them speed to rush forward and engage the enemy really, really early. For medium regiments, I would pretty much look at this as like, maybe if they wanted to close the gap, if you had an early, you know, attack for a medium regiment to do. The thing is it's all based on charges and not so much movement. If it was +3 movement to lights and then +1 movement to mediums and so on, I think it would have a bit more utility, but I don't know. Then again, adding to a charge distance and giving you rerolls is never a bad thing. So if you want the Predator to be your leader, that makes perfect sense to me. And lastly here is the Scion of Conquest. His ability is called Visions of Conquest, and it's very cool. Until the end of the round, each time you would draw a command card from your command stack, instead search your command stack and play a command card of your choice. In addition, until the end of the round, all regiments that would add a chant marker to the chant sequence add a conquest marker instead. I didn't go into this too much detail. A conquest marker is essentially like a wild card. You can have it be whatever you want. It can count as any of the other types of chants. So what this is saying is once per game, at the supremacy phase, you declare this, and you have full information in a limited information game. You don't randomly determine how your regiments are going to be activating. You can do it in real time, and you can be absolutely sure that you're going to get maximum effect out of that stupid chart with all the war chants on it, because you get to choose what all of them are. That is so stinking cool. I love these guys. It's a great roster of heroes. My favorite, again, is the Chieftain, just because it is the simplest. It's army-wide, it's just whatever, simple text. Next one for me is Vision of Conquest by the Scion of Conquest, because to me that is a very cool control element. And it's only once per game, so it's not like you're really taxing yourself by making yourself play a different kind of game the entire time by always having to worry about what units I can activate next. But it's a cool once per game thing for sure. Now at this point we're going to start going into the individual actual unit entries and regiments of the faction, and so it's a little bit easier to do from the army builder screen because it collates all the information a little bit easier for me. Well, again, we're just going to focus on the ones that are already out, and so we're going to begin that discussion with the Matriarch Queen. We just talked about her supremacy ability, draw event where now she can pick someone within 8 inches of her. They become fanatics. Now she does also come with a built-in draw event. Remember, you have to choose which one activates, but the one that she has built in, select a friendly regiment within 8 inches of this character stand and heal it 4 wounds. Each regiment may be the target of To the Last Breath, draw event only once. So if you have multiple queens, it doesn't matter. You're not doing this to the same regiment more than once. But that's an interesting one because healing is so different in version 2 than it was in version 1. But it's a great ability to have. Like, she can keep a regiment at fighting strength for quite some time, because you can always target the one that's that you're attached to, right? That's always in 8 inches. So very cool. As for her other special rules, Inspiring Presence, they gain the Bravery special rule, which basically means they ignore Fearsome and Terrifying. She has a resolve stat of 4. We'll get to the stats here in a second, but that matters because really nothing's going to take them below that, no matter what she's attached to. And Cleave 1. So on the offensive, let's talk about her. She actually moves 6, no volley because she doesn't have a weapon. That's totally fine. Clash 3, it's all right. 5 attacks, 5 wounds, 4 resolve, 3 defense, and 0 evasion. Again, she has to choose a cult like all these heroes do. You're just basically asking what kind of tokens do her regiments generate for the war chant. Artifacts and stuff we'll get into in a dedicated video. I want to do the same thing for that, masteries and retinues. The only thing I'll say with masteries is there is a way to give her Apex Predator like as a mount. So there's a version of her on foot, and then there's one where she's riding the giant T-Rex. For her unit options, for her mainstay, so she can take as many as she wants, Blooded Warbred, which is wonderful because those are tanky, thick boys we'll talk about here in a little bit. Braves and Hunters. Now, I'm just going to spoil, like, little spoiler, I guess, for these units, what they are. Blooded is sort of your elite infantry. Warbred are your brutes, so basically think of them as like your knights that come in, the big punching power on the charge. Braves are your mass ranked infantry, and Hunters are your basic shooting unit. Now restricted, meaning you have to have one mainstay unit for every restricted choice. Apex Predator, which she can ride, and then the Drum Beast, which is not released, and Raptor Riders, which are released and are awesome. We'll talk about them. And then 2 more monsters that are as of yet to be released. Overall, she's a fantastic character. I mean, right now, it's like the best thing that there is for frontline combat action, I would say. Although I do believe that the Predator gives her a run for that money. So let's talk about this boy. Predator, movement 6, volley of 3, which is important because he does have a ranged attack. Clash of 3, 5 attacks, 5 wounds, resolve 3, defense 2, 1 evasion. Not the killiest profile by any stretch. To kick it off, he has Fiend Hunter, which is greatly improved in 2nd edition. It used to be that you could just reroll hit rolls against monsters, but now they've included brutes in this, which every army has quite a few options for in general. So I like that quite a bit. So it's just him. It doesn't give it to the regiment. It's just him, but that's still cool. His big thing, though, is his big crossbow he's rocking, which is like a signature part of his model. Barrage 3, range 18 inches, armor piercing 1, and deadly shot. Deadly shot meaning stands with a special rule. Any failed defense roll of 6 by the target regiment causes 2 wounds instead of 1. So he's pretty cool. Now he has some extra choices he has to make. Of course, he has to pick a warband cult, of course, but also he has these 2 abilities called the different ways of the hunt. There's the hunt 1 and the hunt 2. These are rules he gets for completely free. The regiment this character stand is currently attached to gains the sure shot special rule, which allows you to ignore obscuring terrain when determining line of sight for a volley action. Big guy with a crossbow being allowed to ignore terrain in a game system that's already pretty much heavily incentivizing you to take a lot of shooting. At this point, there's not a lot of shooting in the game, but the ones that there got a big buff with 2nd edition. And the second hunt option, it gains the fire and advance draw event, which if this regiment performs a volley action as its 2nd action during this activation, it can make a free additional march action after the volley action is resolved. So you can move, shoot, move, you can aim, shoot, move, whatever you want to do. It gives you a 3rd option. We'll scroll down here and look at the things he has access to. For the mainstay, Blooded and Braves, you're going to see those pretty much across the board. Those are your basic troops, your more elite ones, and line troops, so it's spears respectively. They have Hunters as well, your basic ranged attack. The Hunting Pack, which we'll get to, that's like these little dinosaurs that run up and just act as harassing units. They're not very good in combat, but they just distract like crazy. And then for a mainstay, he has Raptor Riders. Very good to know. His restricted as well, Apex Predators, Slingers, who are an MVP of this book. I'm going to give that away right now. And 2 beasts that are not released yet, the Quaddle and the Tauntaur. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Predator because he's my favorite one. When you get to like having like, I don't know, 60 to 100 points left in your list, you can kind of go back to your heroes and really kit them out to do super fun things. And he is my favorite one to kit out. For example, there's a mastery where he can have marksmanship, which basically adds 2 to his barrage. So all of a sudden, he's now shooting 5 shots at range 18. If you choose the hunt, now he's ignoring intervening terrain, armor piercing 1, and deadly shot. That's a great profile. We will get to the regiments he's available to take. Really, what I'm going to be building for our league is going to be him with 2 hunting packs, just to have my lights kind of running up the board and setting the line of engagement. And then he's going to come on the board with a set of slingers, because slingers, with the Way of the Hunt 1 that allows you to ignore terrain, are pretty gross. And it makes them a complete shooting unit. So we'll get there eventually. That's the way that I like to take them. And lastly for our heroes is the Scion of Conquest, Movement 6, Volley 0, Clash 3, 5 attacks, 5 wounds, Resolve 4, Defense 2, and Evasion 2. Now I'm going to spoil this. This is the not fighter hero of these guys. He is a priest. He does not want to be in combat too much, but he brings some very unique control spells to the table. So again, Priest 4, he's rolling 4 dice at anything. In 2.0, you have to have at least 2 successes, so that does matter quite a bit for him. He's gonna struggle to cast stuff unless you invest resources into making him better at casting. But he also has Cleave 2, so when he does get into the fracas, he can at least pierce through things. I guess Clash 4 with Cleave 2, that's not bad at all. Resolve 4, I might take that back. He's definitely more fighty than, say, like a wizard or something like that from 100 Kingdoms. Now for his spells, he has 3, and in 2.0, you just get access to all the spells that they know. So this is great for them. First one here is Crescendo, Attunement 4, meaning you have to take your 4 dice, because you're a Priest 4, roll those, and at least 2 of them have to be 4 or less. That's the attunement value. Add a Conquest chant marker to the sequence. Reveal your next command card. If it belongs to a regiment, draw that command card, and the regiment activates immediately. Otherwise, return it to the top of the command stack. Regiments activated in this way do not add a chant marker to the sequence. The reason this is really nice is because, one, you're double activating, right? You get to activate him, he adds a chant marker to the sequence because he activated, and then you cast this spell which specifically adds a Conquest chant marker, which is again your wild card. So it's a great utility one. You're setting up your next unit to be able to deliver a real big punch. And it's a great way to have another regiment activate. Like if you're planning on giving them the Fanatic special rule, it's a great way to supercharge them real fast. The next one is Dissonance. This is also Attunement 4. Until the end of the round, each time an enemy spellcaster attempts to cast a spell onto a regiment within 12 inches of this caster, or attempts to cast a spell while within 12 inches of this caster in general, basically, you may discard 2 chant markers from the sequence to cancel the effects of that spell. Now, Dissonance is an interesting one because it's either going to do everything or nothing, right? Like in some armies, like Old Dominion, tend to have a lot of spells, a lot of 100 Kingdoms builds, that kind of stuff. But against, the average Spire's army, it's not doing much of anything. But again, that's why spellcasters are awesome in this edition, because you're not paying for this spell in particular. It's just kind of in your pocket. It's a toolbox. And the last one here is Cacophony, and this is actually my personal favorite. Range 12. Attunement 4 and scaling, meaning the bigger the regiment you try to do this on, the harder it gets to do. The target regiment may not resolve draw events until the end of the round. That is massive for things specifically like Bastion, where you get +1 defense. You're shutting those things down. It can help break down the Death Star type units, as draw events are generally speaking very important for those. Now I will say, without going into detail about the artifacts and masteries and stuff, there's a bunch of ways to basically buff up his priest level. There's ones where you get priest plus whatever the current number of chant markers is. So if you had 2 in sequence, you could get priest 6, and then there's just the masteries that add flat numbers to that. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do if you want to lean this direction. For me personally, this is some next level stuff of like understanding the flow of the game that I'm personally going to wait on. I'm going to bring him because I love Cacophony. For the amount of points it costs, having this in your back pocket is a wonderful toolbox. I don't know how much I'll get use out of Crescendo, but I would love to hear your thoughts. If you do get a lot of use out of it, please tell me the situation I can set up to do that same thing. Now, as far as his regiment choices, choices, he's got Blooded and Braves, again, your standard choices, we'll get into those. And then the rest of his options, one for mainstay is the Chosen of Conquest, and then the restricted are Chosen of Famine, Chosen of Death, Chosen of War. None of those are released, that's why you don't see a ton of Scions of Conquest like Warbands. It's usually just 1 or 2 regiments max, and that's why, just the options aren't available yet. But those are your leaders, and stepping back, kind of giving a overall look at them. My personal favorite, rules-wise, is actually the Chieftain, but he's not out yet. Predator is really fun. The Predator with a thing of Slingers running up the field with little dinosaurs with him is very cool. And let's start going through our regiments. And I want to begin this discussion with the Blooded and the Braves. Those are the, quite frankly, the boring baseline regiments. But I want to cover them first because every single hero has access to them. So you're going to see them filling up mainstay slots to be able to bring some of the cooler things. Let's start at the bottom here with the Braves. So coming in, movement 5. Again, not great, but you can give them that Path of Conquest thing to give them +3 to their March characteristic. So you got that. So you got movement 5, volley 0, clash 2, attacks 4, wounds 5, resolve 2, defense 2, evasion 0. These are your cheap boys who are there to die and add chant markers realistically. So what do they get for all of that? Well, they have a few special rules that are important. Bloodlust is a very interesting one. Essentially, when these guys activate, they have to roll a d6. And if you're basically taking a resolve test. If you pass it, nothing happens. If you fail it, you have to make a charge if it's possible to do so. The idea is these guys are so like amped for battle and they're so like enthusiastic as youths to get into it and start earning glory that they just really want to be cut loose and sent into battle. Which it's never good to have regiments that you lose control over. However, I think it's pretty rad because honestly, if you're taking a big block of like this, just dudes, they want to run up and charge into stuff as much as possible anyway. I see them as a great, basically a speed bump, if you will. Their next ability is Shield, meaning from the front arc, their defense is actually 3, which isn't bad by any stretch. I mean, that's not terribly dissimilar from Dweghome. And they have support too, because basically they have spears. Normally, when regiments attack, the back ranks, so you have your front rank that's in combat, any stands that are behind that front line, only contribute 1 die. Essentially, every regiment in the game has support 1. When you have support 2, for example, now all of those regiments are contributing 2 dice, which does actually matter, especially as you start having larger and larger regiments for sure. They can have a standard bearer, which gives them rerolling charge rolls, and their only officer option is a champion, which adds +1 to its attack characteristic. But keep in mind that it's regiment wide, so if you have 3 stands, they all go to attack 5. To be honest, they're my least favorite of the regiment options available, but they're also reflected in their cheapness. For 115 points, you get guys who are just meant to run forward and get in the way. They could be charging things out of your control, that's alright. They're there to rush forward and die. They're doing so with shield, and with support, if they're sufficient size, they can put up a bigger fight than I think your opponent is expecting. And remember, all these guys can benefit from anything on the chant table. Okay, so that's Braves. Probably don't want to put a hero with them because you don't want your hero being in regiments that you can't fully control, but that's what it is. And the next ones here are the Blooded. Movement 5, volley 0, clash 2, attacks 6, so we're already starting better. 5 wounds, 3 resolve, 2 defense, and 1 evasion. Okay, so these are supposed to be, I say more elite compared to the Braves because you have full control over them, but compared to other factions, these are not like your elite infantry. These are not the heavy guys, the Dragon Slayers, but they're, a step up for sure. I dare say this is probably your standard option, whereas the Braves are your substandard. They're like, just throw them on the field. But Blooded are wonderful. We'll go through their options here. Of course, they have a standard bearer like everybody, so they can reroll charge rolls, get +1 inch that second move, and they have a huge roster of characters or officers rather, that they can take. So the first one is the Aberration. A regiment with 5 or fewer stands, excluding character stands, may include an aberration. The regiment gains the Lethal Demise special rule. Every failed defense roll this regiment takes, the enemy regiment in contact that caused the hits suffers 1 hit for each wound suffered. So basically, these hits do not benefit from any other special rules and are resolved against the enemy's front arc. So if they have shield, they will be able to defend against it. But essentially, it creates a self-destructive unit where they want to die. They want to run in as fast as possible, be in combat, and as they're being murdered, and losing because they have defense 2 and evasion 1. As that's happening, they're just blowing up and attacking the enemy as they do so. That's an interesting one. It's kind of self-destructive. I don't know if I would choose that one every time, but if you do, let me know. They also have a champion, so +1 to your attacks characteristic. That's wonderful. So 7 attacks for each stand is great. Then you have the skirmisher. Add +1 to your march characteristic, so that is for both movement actions. That's terrific. And you have the chance to perform a free additional withdraw action once each round in addition to its normal actions. Now, I'd be honest with you, not generally going to do a lot of withdraws. If you're not familiar in Conquest, when you do a withdraw, you take a resolve test. In the best case scenario, you take D6 hits. In the worst case scenario, meaning you fail that test, each stand that you are in contact with delivers D6 hits. So it could be pretty rough. I find it generally not, like, if you're at the point where you're like, man, I need to withdraw, that I just generally feel like that regiment's already dead. It's not true. Like, I've done it a few times where it matters. It's just, it's a real brutal rule. They don't like you running away. So that one has, I think, dubious value. Again, if you ever disagree with me, please put your description as to why down below. I would love to hear it. And then the last one is the tracker, which you gain flank and fiend hunter. Fiend hunter we talked about, that's re-rolling hit rolls against monsters and brutes. And then flank is essentially you don't contribute a die to the pool when you're checking reserves. Anytime this regiment can come in, so it's medium. So from turn 2 onto when it automatically comes on, you get to basically choose. You can throttle them, you can bring them in early, whatever you want. It's a lot of control for the regiment, which, again, if you're going to have a hero in it, is wonderful to have. Moving upward, I think in terms of interest level, we're going to talk about the hunters next. Movement 6, volley 2, that's all right. Clash 2, attacks 5, 5 wounds, resolve 2, defense 1, 0 evade. This is your basic ranged attack unit, okay? Hunters. Barrage 4, range 14 inches. They have armor piercing 1 and deadly shot. Remember, deadly shot, because there's all different kinds of modifiers to your shots. Deadly shot is if your opponent rolls a 6 on their defense roll, they take 2 hits instead of 1. They can also have a standard bearer, but why you would want them to reroll charges is beyond me. And it has a few officer options. We already talked about the skirmisher and the tracker. So tracker gives you fiend hunter and flank. One thing I want to double check here. Yeah, it just says all failed hit rolls against monsters and brute regiments. So it would absolutely benefit them to have one. Their shots would get to reroll as well. Skirmisher we mentioned, get a free withdraw action, +1 march. That one I could see if you really want your shooting units to be highly mobile, but their unique one is the Flint Napper. This regiment rerolls failed hit rolls of 6 when performing a volley action. That's wonderful as it already increases your accuracy a good percentage. Furthermore, an enemy regiment does not benefit from the Hardened X special rule when making defense rolls. Now, this is huge. Hardened, if you're not familiar, is sort of like a rule that negates armor piercing. If I shoot at you, you'd say you have defense 3, and I shoot at you with armor piercing 2. You say, haha, but I have hardened 2, which negates the 2 armor piercing that I have. What this is allowing me to do is essentially circumvent that entire rule altogether. You don't get hardened. It doesn't matter if it's hardened 10,000, this shot will go straight through. Now, it has a lot more value against some armies than others. For example, like going into, say, Moroi or Kerai or something like that for Old Dominion, it does nothing for you. Going into Bone Golems, it does a lot. Going into Dragon Slayers against Dweghome, it means an immense amount. There's a lot of cool things going on. Then I want to talk about Slingers. I mentioned these as a kind of a star unit when I was talking about the Predator. So Slingers come in, they're a light unit, so they're going to get on the board very, very early. Movement 6, volley 3, so again, better shots, okay. Clash 2, attacks 4, wounds 5, resolve 2, defense 1, evasion 0. You don't want these guys in combat. That's basically all it says to you. Their special rules, though, are where they really shine. First of all, barrage 4. So each of these stands, 4 shots, 12 total. That's great. Range 18 inches. Great looking range. I love it. Torrential fire. Now let's talk about this bad boy. When a stand with this special rule makes a volley action, targeting an enemy regiment within half its barrage range, each successful hit roll causes an additional automatic hit on the target. It doubles up your successes. Now, I tangentially have had access to this rule with my Fireforged and my Dweghome, but people rarely get into the half range of Fireforged. They're a pretty short range unit. Whereas these guys, 18-inch range, getting in 9 inches, that's not unreasonable. I'm not going to try to go for it, but if it happens, it happens. But that's not really what makes these guys great, which is a sad thing to say, because this is an incredible rule. But it's this little text right down here. It's not a universal special rule, it's just for Slingers. Wounds caused by this regiment as a result of a volley action cause morale tests. This does not apply to character stands that have joined the regiment. That's massive, okay? One of the big balancing factors of this game is that shooting is not very prevalent. I mean, Nords have the bow chosen, which can be really, really gross. The Spires have some shooting options, specifically with the Vanguard drones, I believe, or clones rather, are really great. The Hellbringer Drake and so on for Dweghome. But one thing that all of those units have to abide by, the fact is that shooting doesn't cause morale tests. You have to break the enemy realistically in combat. Slingers, that is not the case. They're not cheap, but they're not terribly expensive compared to some of their choices that we get. And when you start thinking about how, like, really what I'm looking at with these guys is not a shooting Death Star. They're not gonna like just point at a faction or a regiment and delete it or anything like that. But here's what it does. By including resolve tests, you're ratcheting up the paper cuts that these kinds of shooting units can deliver by like leaps and bounds. How many light regiments, again, the thing they're probably gonna face the most, how many light regiments have stellar resolve? There's a few, you know, Flame Berserkers are one of them, but it's not the norm. So that's just a killer rule. It's so good. And the Predator can go with them. He can, again, remember, he has the Ways of the Hunt. He gives them ignore intervening terrain. There's already in version 2.0 of the game, there's no obscuring due to long range. You just get a bonus if you're within half range, which complements the torrential fire well. If you wanted to try it, I still wouldn't, but yeah, hanging out at 18 inches with his huge gun. Again, if you give him the mastery for marksmanship, you give these guys the ability to ignore terrain. They're firing through everything. It's so cool. So this is a huge shout out. If you're doing Wadroon, this is a unit to at least have one or two of. Next one here to focus on are the Warbred. Again, these are your giant brute boys. What's great about these guys is they are medium, so they're still going to be coming in fairly early, and let's explore them. So movement of 6, volley 0, clash 2, which is a bit sad. 5 attacks, 5 wounds, 3 resolve, 3 defense, and 0 evasion. Now, as for their special rules, cleave 2, that's great for getting through armor. Impact 2, great for just being on the charge. Relentless blows, so every hit roll of a 1, I believe, turns into 2 hits, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, that's correct 1. And they have the option to use the burnout draw event. So if you don't know, all draw events are inherently optional, so you don't have to do this. But when you flip their command card, you can choose to. Burnout. Stands in this regiment gain +1 clash and +2 march, as well as the decay 3 special rule. If you're unfamiliar with that, you roll a number of dice equal to the X value for each stand. So in this case, you're rolling 3 dice for each stand. Each 5 or a 6 on that will deliver a wound to the stand. It's important to note that that does not cause morale tests. So they can essentially super buff themselves for 1 round. If you just need them to, like, you know, be a scalpel, point and click, get some damage in, that's what they can do. You can do the draw event and then charge, which also gives you an inspire, so now you're at clash 4 with some extra movement. I mean, they can be pretty gross if you want them to be. Keep in mind that if you can set up a situation where they run up and punch and kill something, and then you have, say, a matriarch queen nearby with her draw event, she can heal them back up. Not necessarily something I want to bank on, but it's a cool idea. Our next regiment are the Raptor Riders. We're getting into the dino stuff now, guys, and I'm so excited. This is a cavalry unit. Again, it is light. Movement of 8, this is your highly mobile units. Movement of 8, volley 2, clash 2, not the best fighties. 5 attacks, 5 wounds, 3 resolve, 2 defense, and 2 evasion. So little dodgy little things. Their special rules are fluid formation, which is basically you get a free reform action. There's some rules about when you can do it, but this allows you to be highly reactive. You can move and kind of pivot and position yourself for great charges. It's a wonderful ability. It's like, you know, in a rank and flank game, it's really up there with giving you a lot of movement freedom. Their next special rule is Flurry, which is you get to re-roll all failed hit rolls when you perform a clash or a duel action. Doesn't matter if you charge that round or anything like that, it's just straight up re-rolls, which when you have a clash of 2 is really nice. Now they do come in throwing spears like this. They barrage 2, range of 12 inches, armor piercing 1. You know, they're not stellar. These are really great flanking forces. If you can hit the enemy from the side, make them re-roll resolve tests, that kind of stuff, it will greatly impact how much damage they can do. Speaking of which, they don't have the impact rule and they are cavalry. So that's an interesting thing there. As for command models, they just have one option. It's called the Huntress, and it basically provides the leader and the standard bearer bonus. They do that with a few regiments. It's pretty cool. I would take it just because I think the reroll charges is great. If you're going to stack that with fluid formation, have them go around the flank and try to pull forces in different directions, or use them as a double tap, right? You have a big unit of blooded that are all soup to the nines to go kill things, and then Raptor Riders come in from the side just to kind of make it 2-on-1. Smash the enemy, Raptor Riders can go somewhere else with their fluid formation very quickly and easily and do it all over again. Now let's talk about the Hunting Pack, one of my favorite regiments just aesthetically and conceptually, okay? So these are light, they count as cavalry, they're tiny little dinosaur guys that are running up. Movement of 8, volley of 0, because they don't have a gun, that makes perfect sense. Clash 2, 6 attacks, 3 wounds, which for a cavalry-sized stand is funny. 3 wounds, resolve 2, defense 1, and evasion 1. These guys are meant to die, like in every sense. Special rules, they have one that we're going to see a few more times here as we talk more about dinosaurs. Unsung, they never follow a chant, they don't place chant markers, and they cannot ever benefit from the rules. That's just the dinosaurs. The orcs, of course, can use anything on that battle cry template. It is what it is. Opportunists. A stand with this special rule may reroll failed hit rolls when performing a clash or volley action against an enemy regiment's flank or rear arc. So if he gets them in the side or the back, they get rerolls, but okay. You know, I'm not really looking at them with the lens of fighting, but it's a cool thing if they get it. Irregular, meaning they do not contribute to your reinforcement lines, which, you know, everything's so fast in Wadroon. I feel like the reinforcement line is not nearly as much of a decisive factor as it is to some other factions, but it's good to have. Fluid formation we talked about with the Raptor Riders gives them a free reform. They can move around, pivot, get into some cool angles and that kind of stuff. And then Vanguard, which is when you enter the battlefield with these guys, you get to perform a free additional march action during the activation. So it has no effect if there's anyone like immediately nearby. So these guys can come onto the board, right? Let's say turn 1, you get your free light, because in 2.0, every round you get at least 1 guaranteed unit. These guys are going to come onto the board and make a free move, 8 inches. They could, if they wanted to at that point, move. Actually, they could move onto the table, do like their reform shenanigans with fluid formation and get into whatever position they want to be in. Great early game utility piece just for running up the board in terms of just dead, you know, mileage that you get out of their movement stat, but then also the ability to move around, pivot, and that kind of stuff is great. And then our last option today from the stuff that's been released is, of course, the Apex Predator, the giant T-Rex, the coolest model ever. I love this guy. So movement of 7, so he's a speedy chunky boy. It is heavy, so that's important to know. Volley 0, clash of 3, 11 attacks, 12 wounds, 4 resolve, 3 defense, and 0 evasion. Now he has a suite, if you will, of special rules here. Deadly Blades, we've covered a lot of these already. Deadly Blades, if your opponent rolls a 6 on the defense, you do 2 damage. Basically it's a 2 wound attack. Cleave 2, talk about that, lowers their defense. Fearless, of course, they're not going to be negatively modified by terrifying things because they are the terrifying thing. Fiend Hunter, eating other big monsters and stuff, makes sense. Unstoppable, built in, can reroll his own charges. Doesn't need anything for it, I love it. Terrifying 2 makes him a brutal opponent for anything other than Old Dominion because it just negatively modifies your resolve, and that just makes all of these other attack-based things just cascadingly worse for your opponent. And Impact 5, so when he charges in, he's rocking 5 dice at whatever comes near him. No real special rules other than that, but that's a killer profile to then build, you know, a matriarch queen on top of. And at only 190 points, you can take multiples of them. In fact, my list is going to have 2 Apex Predators in there just to be able to split up and kind of conquer various parts of the battlefield. So friends, that is the Wadroon, at least the regiments that have been released as of so far with Conquest 2.0. I'm very excited to jump into them. Part of the appeal of this was that the lot was already built for me, which is honestly, like, building models is the worst part of the hobby for me, but they came to me all built and ready to go, so I'll be sharing that progress with you. I'm very excited, and if there's things I got wrong about the chanting and that kind of stuff, please let me know in the comments down below. I always pin the most helpful comment from folks. So if you have a different take on any of these regiments and how you use them, or you want to share cool tactical advice, I would love that. Please let us know in the comments down below. Also, let me know what faction you would like me to do next. I do plan on doing all of them. I'm just trying to kind of get the highest priority ones in right now. Thank you all so much for hanging out and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Conquest video. Happy wargaming.